A bit like a rubber out on track. Tried to take it easy for a couple of laps.
My name is Tom Lomas, and in 2009, I was an 8-year-old boy. On one Sunday afternoon, I sat down to watch an F1 race with my dad, and the story I witnessed unfold in front of me stuck with me for life. This story was a real-life fairy tale, and it's a story I have dreamt of telling ever since I watched it happen. That story, of course, was the story of Brawn GP.
Here's the man who didn't know he had a team, didn't know he had a drive, who's now going to take victory in Melbourne. Jenson Button crosses the line, takes the checkered flag. Jenson Button's a winner again. Brawn GP are winners on their first race appearance, and not only that, it's a 1-2 finish. Button from Barrichello, the smiles are on Ross Brawn and Sir Richard Branson. What a result, and history too. Fangio did it with Mercedes in 1954. Jenson Button has done it with Brawn GP in 2009. From pole to victory on his debut for a new team. Absolutely remarkable.
Honda's pulling out of Formula One and plans to sell its team. Unless a buyer is found before the end of the month, they'll have to withdraw from the 2009 competition, ending the Japanese car giant's 9-year involvement in the sport.
Brawn GP is one of motorsport's greatest fairy tales. But to tell it in full, we need to take a step back to the previous season of 2008. And to help me do so, I managed to recruit the help of a few crucial personnel from Brawn GP.
My name's Nick Fry.
My name is Nicola Armstrong.
My name is Jenson Button.
And I was the CEO of Brawn GP.
In 2009, I was working as a press officer.
And I was one of the 2 drivers for Brawn GP.
Nicola, Jenson and Nick were crucial parts of that 2009 season in their own independent ways. On top of that, however, they had also all been around at the end of 2008, when things hadn't been anywhere near as good. For Jenson, the 2008 season saw him finish 18th in the championship, and for Nick, Nicola and the team as a whole, it was a lowly 9th in the Constructors. It was far from impressive and left Honda with some thinking to do, and ultimately, it wasn't good news.
We were taken into a conference room where the great and the good of Honda sat round the table with people from Honda UK and people from Japan and a whole bunch of people who amazingly just said, please go back to Brackley, get everyone together and tell them we're closing down.
Another victim of the economic meltdown. This time it's dealt a major blow to the richest of sports. Honda's pulling out of Formula One and plans to sell its team.
I went away doing my training, and as I flew back, I landed at Gatwick waiting for my bags. I got a call from the team saying that Honda are pulling out of the sport. The team no longer exists, basically, and we won't be going racing in 2009, which hurt for many reasons. One, because I didn't think I'd be racing in Formula One. I'd won 1 Grand Prix in my whole career at that point, which wasn't what I set out to do. Still pretty cool achievement, but the World Championship, or at least fighting for the World Championship, was always my aim. And also I knew how good the car was going to be for the next year. 2008 was a tough year, and one of the reasons is because we didn't develop it. We spent the whole season developing the next season's car, which turned into the Brawn. So it was a pretty tough moment.
So I had a lady who was my boss, who was our PR manager, called Tracy Novak. And I distinctly remember Tracy taking me out for lunch. I think my mind tells me it was on a Wednesday, and then breaking the news to me over lunch in quite a crowded cafe, which she later said was probably a bad idea because obviously I was very upset. She became very upset, and it was quite difficult to have a conversation in that environment. So I distinctly remember sort of us struggling through the lunch and then going and sitting in her car for a while afterwards and sort of chatting through all the details. So I obviously knew probably 2 days, I think, ahead of all the employees. It was pretty devastating, I think. The news to the team was broken by Ross and Nick on Thursday in our race base, and I have to say they did an absolutely brilliant job of handling a very difficult situation. They're both very good people managers. I remember Nick taking very clearly the sort of business line, stating out the facts, being brutally honest about what the situation was. And then Ross came in afterwards to do the sort of more emotional side, sort of giving everybody the hope that there was a future out there for us. And it was very emotional. But I kind of remember Ross saying, we're not going to let this beat us. Are you all with me? And there was sort of a big cheer from everybody in the factory. And I think we went out of that obviously feeling quite concerned, but also with a degree of optimism that we had two very heavy hitters who were fighting as hard as they could to keep our jobs.
We went back to the factory and got everyone together and said, look, we're going to fix it. We're going to go out looking for buyers. And of course, you're going to worry, but we think we can find a solution to this.
Spent a lot of time on the phone with my manager working through ideas. First of all, it was, is there another seat available? And there was one at Toro Rosso, but not a seat that was going to sort of further my career. So we're like, okay, well, let's push and see if we can get someone to buy the team.
So look for new buyers they did, a process that proved to be much easier said than done, especially in the depths of one of the worst economic landscapes the world has ever seen. Ultimately, however, there was a decision that had to be made.
Quite quickly, we had probably more than 20 prospective buyers, and myself and the finance director and the legal director set our aim on talking to some of these candidates who turned out in many cases to be not the most straightforward people, let's say. So we had a period of several weeks talking to let's say, people you wouldn't normally get to know in normal circumstances, because in the depths of the financial crisis, there weren't too many credible buyers who wanted a not very successful, very expensive Formula One team that was probably going to eat a couple of $100 million in the following year. And the people who did show interest were those that possibly, with a couple of exceptions, were opportunists, let's say. Honda came to the same conclusion that Ross and I had come to, that this wasn't the greatest idea. So by the time we got to Christmas, we really had got nowhere in terms of, I'd been meeting people every day, but there was no one Honda hand on heart would be able to say, we've sold or given the team to these people and they're good future owners. So we came to the conclusion that possibly we weren't going to find anyone suitable. So maybe we had to think about doing a so-called management buyout.
And then suddenly it went a bit quiet. I was like, okay, this is strange. And then they called us back and said, actually, they're gonna take control of the team for $1. So at least we were going racing. We were just a little bit worried whether we'd have the funding to actually, even if we started with a good car, to finish this season out. So I think everyone in the team was very excited that the team was racing against. A lot of people were still getting laid off, which obviously hurt. We're going to the first race. We think the car's going to be good, but there's also hundreds of people back at Brackley that are getting laid off because they can't afford to pay them. So mixed emotions once again. And then obviously we got to the first race. The car was competitive, but there were many areas still that we were lacking. One was pit stops. We hadn't done any pit stop practice. So, we were so slow at pit stops, but still, even with the issues that we had, the car ran reliably and we finished with a...
Whoa, hold on there, Jenson. No spoilers. First things first, we need to have a chat about what happened when the newly branded Brawn GP car rocked up at pre-season testing.
We went to the last test of the year because obviously we didn't have a car that was ready to go. So the other teams had been testing for several weeks and we hadn't done any testing at all. We went along to the last test and put the car on the track and wow, caramba, this thing was unbelievable.
I came in the pits and my engineer walked up to me. It was Andrew Shovelin, who's now the chief engineer at Mercedes. He'd looked at me and said, so how was it? And I said, well, it feels okay. The balance isn't quite there. It's a bit too much understeer here. We've got a bit of rear locking there. I said, how's it? I look on the timing screen. He said, you're quickest by 0.6. So I said, hang on, I don't believe you. So I got out the car. We were ready to go for our second run, but I got out, took my helmet off, walked over to the timing screens and just to have a look where we stood. And I was like, okay, that's pretty good. So then we got back in the car, put new tires on, went out. And I think we were a second quicker than everyone else, if not a bit more. And then I came back in. I was like, yeah, it feels a bit better. There's still room for improvement. And the team just said, JB, we're going to have to put fuel in it. We're going to have to put fuel in the car. We're going to have to make it heavy so we don't look so quick. People are going to think we're running underweight and testing to try and find sponsors because the car was completely blank. We had Brawn GP written on it and that was it. So we put the fuel in and we were still quick, still the quickest, even with fuel on board. So a great first test. And I think, there were moments during the day where all the mechanics would disappear out the garage, putting bets on for the season. Because the odds were so good of a startup team winning a world championship. I think they were getting 250 to 1 or 500 to 1. So, it was massive.
So after a really tough winter, the team pulled through. They had done it, and they had a really good car to come along with them. By this point, Honda was but a memory in their rearview mirror, and the future was white, fluorescent yellow, and sponsorless. But nevertheless, Brawn GP were going racing.
It's race day here in Melbourne as we continue with what could shape up to be one of the best Australian Grand Prix.
And then the race came round and I was so nervous at the start because I didn't know if I was going to be able to get it off the line. Again, we didn't know practice starts really.
We got 2 red lights. When they go out, we're away in Melbourne for 2009. It's Jenson Button, and an awful start there by Rubens Barrichello. Jenson Button streaks forward. Vettel's there as well. Master's trying to come through on the outside as well. Rosberg's up in close attendance as well, up into 3rd place. Or there is actually Kubica's come back as well. Dreadful start for Rubens Barrichello, and there's all sorts of mayhem at the first corner. But Jenson Button is away.
And I got a mega start, one of my best starts in Formula 1, and just drove away into turn 1. Rubens had a bad start. Lots of clutch slip, and was back into the pack, whereas I had the cleanest run, and I think I pulled a second and a half out by turn 3. So everything was looking good, and then we got to the pit stop.
Pitting this lap then, come into the pits at the end of this lap.
Here's then Jenson Button in. Now let's see how long this will be. Barrichello was 21 seconds. And that included that front nose. Fuel goes in. Oh, there's a problem here. Now that didn't help. Oh dear.
Release.
So they took 8 seconds longer than everyone else's pit stops, I think. So it put us into a really tricky situation. We didn't have a refueling guy that had any experience. The guy that was our refueling guy, he left because he was going to be made redundant anyway. So he ended up, I think he went to be a plumber. So the first race, we actually had a guy that had no experience of refueling whatsoever. And these things are heavy. They're really heavy to get onto the car. And when the fuel comes through and then you've got to take it off, and it's not easy. We didn't luck in the first race because we had the pace. But in terms of a team, we didn't do the best job, as you wouldn't expect. You're going up against the best in the world who have practiced all winter. And we hadn't. So we got a little bit lucky at times during that race. Seb Vettel and Kubica crashed as well as they were chasing me down. So it left it wide open for my teammate as well to finish P2 to get a 1-2 finish. So it was the dream scenario for the team that didn't think they'd exist. They were going to exist only a few months ago.
I was called up to Nick's office on the Friday before the Australian Grand Prix. And I distinctly remember him asking me what I was doing that weekend, what I had planned. I said, we've got a lot of work to do to prepare for Australia. I'd probably go and see my parents. And he said, well, what I need you to do is on Monday morning, you need to get on the plane to Australia. Unfortunately, we've had to make your boss redundant. So you are in charge. You're going to be in charge of our comms. There's a very strong likelihood we're going to win the race. And we're going to announce Richard Branson and Virgin as a sponsor.
We had no money whatsoever. We were traveling around as cheaply as we could. We were sending the minimum number of people to races because we didn't have any money. We didn't have any sponsors, although we quickly accumulated some nice ones when it looked like we were going to do well, including obviously Virgin, which helped us a lot. So
for me, it was fantastic. I genuinely thought I would probably lose my job right up to the point of being a week before Australia. And then for that to turn around and realise that, a lot of my close colleagues, my manager had lost their job, and there were now 4 of us in marketing who were going to be responsible for turning this situation round and sort of going out to Australia and representing the team was quite incredible. But I think it was tempered with the very real thought that when I left for Australia on Monday, I knew when I came back the following week that there would be a lot of my colleagues who wouldn't be there. And that was really sad at the same time because a lot of us had been there for many years together. And we were going from, I think we must have been a department of about 16 maybe. And we were going from that 16, 17, we were going down to 4, and that would be it. It would just be those 4 people from the big team that we'd had. So that part of it was very sad. But for me personally, it was also a great opportunity and a great challenge.
We all looked at each other and said, well, this is what we can do if we have an average weekend. If we can polish up on the areas that we were weak, and maybe let's speak to the plumber to get him back in to put fuel in the car for the next race, which they did. Yeah, if that was a tough weekend, imagine what a weekend that went smoothly would be like.
And smooth weekends is exactly what they went on to do. With a team full of passion, perseverance and now petrol, they kept pushing. And what would come over the next 7 races would be 6 incredibly dominant wins.
Here's the man who didn't know he had a team, didn't know he had a drive, who's now going to take victory in Melbourne. Winner in Australia, winner in Malaysia, but only half points, but round the final turn. And Jenson Button and Brawn are back on the top step of the podium. Here is Jenson Button, winner in Melbourne, winner in Malaysia, winner in Bahrain, and he's done it again in Barcelona. He wasn't on pole, but he was on the front row. And here he comes for another checkered flag. Jenson Button. The Button bandwagon rolls into Silverstone, with Jenson Button winning 6 out of 7 races, and that championship is getting over nearer.
The wins were coming thick and fast, and Brawn GP were on top of the world. But no win meant more than the illustrious Monaco Grand Prix.
But this is a checkered flag he was probably dreaming about. Jenson Button coming through now for Brawn Grand Prix. We're in the 6th race, and it's his 5th victory. And that is champion's form in anybody's book. Jenson Button wins in Monaco.
You've done it, man. Great job. The one we all wanted. Well done. Awesome drive.
Monaco, baby! Yeah!
Yeah, it was an awesome race and a race that I'll never forget. It's a special one, winning in Monaco. I was living there at that time as well, so it's a very, very big celebration. And when you win, you celebrate with everyone.
The race itself, I slept through. I'd had 2 or 3 very late nights with sponsors and potential sponsors. First I knew that we won was Nicola Armstrong, our PR lady, was kind of shaking me saying, go and get the trophy.
I shall never forget Ross saying, look, we're pretty close to winning this race, Nicola. We're going to put Nick on the podium. Just go and let him know, would you? And searching everywhere for him, and then to finally find him asleep was quite a moment. So he looked somewhat startled when I woke him up to tell him he needed to get himself to the podium.
When it really comes home is there's a dinner that night at the sporting club, and only the winning team are invited. Everyone is in this huge, beautiful banqueting room, and they clap you in. So they're all standing up, banging the tables and what have you. And and that sort of moment, you just kind of super special. And then obviously you sit down at the top table, and it was Ross and I and our wives and Jenson and his girlfriend, and you're on the top table with the royal family.
You get to sit next to the Crown Prince, Prince Albert. It was pretty awesome. I was actually sat next to his niece as well. A fun evening.
Towards the end of the dinner, the roof motors back at the end, and so you're out in the fresh air, as it were, but very quietly, and you barely notice it happening, and then this huge firework display is going on above your head, and one of the memorable moments was the look on Jenson's face was just of a 5-year-old, just in, I think probably all of us, in absolute wonderment.
I mean, Monaco itself, whatever situation you're in, wherever you're winning or losing, it is just the most amazing weekend. And if you ever get the chance to go as a fan, you just got to do it. It's something else. It's difficult. It's noisy. It's exhausting. And it's just a really hard place to work in logistically. And I just the attention that we had from the media and the sort of the closeness of the paddock, the track, it's just an amazing atmosphere.
Coming out of Monaco, Brawn GP were on a massive high. However, little did they know that that would be one of the last highs they would feel for a while. In what is looked back on and remembered as this incredible fairy tale season for Brawn, they had their fair share of low points.
People forget how it was at times that year, and it was pretty tough at times for the whole team.
When things started to get difficult, there started to be some sort of cracks. I mean, Rubens didn't have the best luck, or didn't make best luck for himself, whichever way you look at it. So he felt kind of slightly hard done by. Jenson, the drivers have to believe it's all them. And so I would say the thing that won the championship was the car. Jenson did a good job, but he nearly blew it. When the pressure came on, like most sports people, like most human beings, it starts to get really tough when the pressure's on you. So, I mean, he started to get a bit more antsy. We were hanging on by our fingertips. We clearly did not have the fastest car. Red Bull had the fastest car from actually pretty early on in the season. If you look at qualifying, they overtook us pretty quickly, and we had great long run pace, and we could win races, but in qualifying we weren't necessarily the quickest.
So I think we won the first 6 races, and then we didn't win again until Rubens won in Valencia, I think, which was a long way into the summer. So that kind of point in the middle of the season where we were really struggling was very tough. I think that was the point at which everyone was tired, because you were effectively doing the jobs of 2, 3, 4 people, and that was the point at which you had to really grit your teeth and sort of pull everybody through that period. And I don't think there was ever a point at which we thought we were going to win the championship, because it just got so difficult towards the end. And I think if you look at the results, you sort of notice that. I remember Singapore as being a particularly tough weekend. For me personally, I found it very difficult. I'd reached the stage of the season where I was exhausted. We were flying economy, we were turning up late, we'd just run out of steam basically, and I think that was a really difficult race for everybody. It was difficult for Jenson. I think from memory he finished 14th, and that felt like the lowest point. There
were a few things that were an issue. One was that we weren't developing, and everyone else had developed this double diffuser that we had, and they had the resources to keep pushing the car forward. We didn't. Mentally, it was the toughest year I ever had in motorsport. I've had bad years in motorsport, but you get over them. That one was tough because it's a bit like Max now in F1, and it's because they suddenly have an opportunity to win the World Championship and fight for that World Championship, which they haven't had for so long. They don't know if that's going to come around again next year or 5 years' time. I also struggled with that. I started pushing too hard and not driving in the way that worked for me. I needed to be smooth. I needed to be precise. If I brake too late for a corner, it just didn't work with my style. And then we came through to the end of the season. I had a couple of reasonably good results. For me, the strength was more the racing than the qualifying, because I just couldn't get the tyres working in qualifying. So some good results, and then it came to Brazil.
Rio de Janeiro may have the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympic Games in 2016, but Formula One rules in Sao Paulo, second biggest city in the world, and with one of the city's own sons starting from pole and gunning for the championship, this could be another special day at Interlagos. Frankly, there is no other Grand Prix crowd which radiates such energy, such enthusiasm and such electricity. And after the mayhem of qualifying in the rain yesterday, in the session that seemed to have no end, where is the championship heading, you wonder? The title that seemed to be Jenson Button's for the taking still hangs in the balance, even though he could have been scripting.
Well, I love Brazil. It's such a great track in Interlagos. My teammate was obviously Brazilian. Brazilians are very patriotic, and they didn't like me being competitive, and they were pretty tough on me, actually. I found it really tough mentally that weekend. They were booing me when I was out on track or when I was in the garage, and they could see me. And in all the restaurants I was at, they would put a ladder outside of the entrance, so I had to walk under the ladder. So it was like bad luck, and it did get to me, I have to say. I
think everybody was desperate to get it wrapped up. I think the pressure by that point had built to quite a crescendo. You could tell it was affecting everybody, and it affecting Jenson, I think, as well. And it was just a determined feeling, right, we've got to get it done. I mean, anything could happen, and it could go horribly wrong, but we hoped it would go brilliantly. So I think there's a real sense of anticipation, a lot of nerves, and just a feeling of wanting to get it over the line so we could relax and enjoy the final race.
And so, after a long, hard and expensive season, Brawn had got to the finish line. The checkered flag was closer than ever and they could really do it. They could be champions. The nerves were high and the pressure was on. All they had to do was qualify well and bring the title home in the race. But in classic Brawn style, they couldn't make it easy for themselves.
I mean, it was obviously really stressful because we didn't qualify well. It wasn't a relaxing weekend from the point of view of, we were in a good position. We weren't in a good position.
Qualifying came round and, I loved those wet conditions and I thought I'd be really competitive. We made a mistake on the tyre choice and I ended up back on 14th on the grid.
Jenson Button, 14th fastest, and coming into the pits, the championship leader will not be going into Q3.
My teammate was on pole. Sebastian Vettel, the other title contender, was behind me, so it wasn't too bad. I got out onto the grid before the race. Everyone's booing me, throwing stuff, and it was tough. And I have to say, I had all the British journalists by my side. Whether they write good or stuff about you, they were there, they were supportive, and it was really nice to have that. Went out, had an amazing race, a drive I knew I had to do to really deserve the World Championship, and the race of my life. I knew everything was on the line that race, and there was one race to go in the championship, but I didn't want to leave it till then. I wanted to win it in Brazil.
Battle through, and now here comes Jenson Button, the 2009 World Champion. Look at the relief, look at the joy. It's all now out in the open. Brawn are the Constructors' Champions. Jenson Button is World Champion. They daren't believe it almost after qualifying yesterday, down in 14th, his worst ever qualifying of the season, and yet he's come through.
Crossed the finish line in 5th, won the World Championship, and obviously saw my dad, who was the first person I saw, so I gave him a big hug. And it was awesome. I watched the footage back and I see myself crossing the line and singing "We Are the Champions," which was pretty amazing, I must say.
We are the champions, my friends. We are world champions, world champions. Woo!
And then seeing the team on the pit wall, Andrew Shovlin, Ron Meadows, who was the team manager, Bono, who's Lewis's chief engineer now, Ross Brawn. But then it shoots to Team Button, which was my dad and whoever else I mentioned. Them all cuddling and cheering and shouting and crying, and those emotions are pretty awesome to see.
When he won the World Championship and went across the line, there was it was mayhem, and obviously, especially the British press, but really globally, it was just this extraordinary thing where these people who had no right to exist suddenly had, won the World Championship in style.
It was just the perfect dream year to have in Formula One, really. It's so different to how things were previously and how things are now. And I think we were very aware at the time that this was a one-off year that would not be repeated. And I'm immeasurably proud when I look back at what we achieved, and more really how we pulled together as a team and managed to get through it, because it was tough. I think that's perhaps something you don't see from the outside, is how hard it was and how hard people worked, and how grueling it was to get through a season with such a small team. So the feeling of accomplishment post Brazil was quite something. It was one hell of a team party.
And they did it. Brawn really did it. In their maiden and ultimately only season as a Formula One team, they came through to take not only the Drivers' Championship, but the Constructors' title too. And they are still to this date the only team since the first season of Formula One, over 70 years ago, to take a title on their first try. And that is why I love this story so much, and why it has stuck with me for years since, because at the depths of the 2008 financial crisis, the team found themselves in an overwhelmingly bad position. But through the dedication and perseverance of the entire Brackley team, they came back, and not only continued where the previous Honda team had left off, but strove further, managing to take themselves to championship glory. The Brawn team really is the definition of a Phoenix team born from the ashes of its Honda-based predecessor. Although that was the only season they ran under the Brawn GP name, the Brackley team didn't stop there. At the end of 2009, Ross and Nick sold the team to their engine provider and paved the way for a team that would go on to win the most consecutive titles in the history of the sport, and arguably become one of the most successful Formula One teams of all time. That team, of course, was none other than Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1.
They've been imperious for the last 7 seasons. It's 7 consecutive Constructors' Championships for Mercedes. They win